Okay, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everybody. Want to welcome you to January's virtual Lyme Impact Session. We're really excited this evening to be portraying a research report that has captured a lot of attention in the Lyme community. Dr. Jennifer Fagen and Dr. Jeremy Shelton with our medical gaslighting and Lyme disease, the patient experience. Before we get into that, our hosts are Bill Moore, who is a PA Lyme board member, is the director of IT. Bill also runs the Pittsburgh Lyme Support Group region, and myself, Eric Huck, I'm president of PA Lyme, and I'm a regional leader of the Harrisburg Area Support Group region. Before we jump into tonight's session, just want to do a little bit of a quick review of 2024, some of our accomplishments. Last year, we ended up doing literally dozens of Lyme prevention education seminars for high-risk groups, whether it's for outdoor sports, children, hunters, anglers, sports athletics. Not only did we do a lot of formal Dare to be Tick Aware prevention seminars within our regions, we did an awful lot of community events. We also held last spring a patients and parents conference. We had 60 attendees, a dozen vendors. It really was an opportunity to get into central Pennsylvania. We held it at the Hershey Lodge to be able to get a lot of top-notch speakers and timely information to cover not only Lyme disease, but tick-borne diseases as well. We're very happy to have added 3 new regions last year: Philly Lyme Support Group, Norlanco Lyme, as well as Chester County Lyme. We launched a virtual young adult Lyme support group program where we meet on a monthly basis. This isn't so much a support group as much as it is a social group for young adults. We recognize with the chronic effects of Lyme and tick-borne illness, the socialization and the really the challenges that young people have in terms of networking and reaching out to their peers is sometimes not the easiest thing. So we created a monthly mechanism for the young adults to be able to do that. More on that in a second. Very happy that last year Senate Bill 232, sponsored by Senator Michelle Brooks, was passed. It is now Act 120. It's the Lyme disease education of parents and establishing protocols for tick bites in schools. If a child's in a school and there's a tick removal, there's a protocol where a teacher or a school nurse or an appointed person at that school does the tick removal. There's a mechanism to send the tick to ticklab.org to get a report if the tick was carrying any infections, and then to notify the parents and make them aware of it. So Senator Michelle Brooks has really been very instrumental within the Lyme community of trying to push for very favorable Lyme rights for the Lyme community. So coming up, mark your calendar. The Young Adult Support Group will be next Thursday, January 23rd. It's by Zoom, 2 hours from 7 to 9. Pretty informal arrangement of how the young adults are carrying the meeting and who's sharing and how it's working. We do have adult monitors. If it's a child that's under the age of 18, we do get adult parent releases, but it's a great monthly mechanism for young adults that are affected by Lyme or chronic illness. In February, our next virtual Lyme Impact session will be Mariah Hinchy. Dr. Hinchy is going to be conducting a presentation, an herbal approach to healing Bartonella, Babesia, and Borrelia, Lyme disease. It's going to be covering the basic pathophysiology of the 3 Bs as well as the mechanisms of action of specific herbals that are effective in treating them. Whether you singularly have one of the infections or you have multiple co-infections, there is a particular methodology of herbal treatment, and many of which folks that we work with in the Lyme community feel that might even be a better way than pharmaceuticals. Mark your calendars also. We don't have the date confirmed yet, but it will be in June. We are thinking it'll be the 5th, 6th, and 7th approximately, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday in June. It'll be a medical practitioners conference. This is not for the general public. This is for medical practitioners. It will be held in partnership with ILADS and the Drexel University College of Medicine. It will qualify for continuing medical education credits for the doctors. And we are pretty happy that ILADS is embracing this in a way that there will be a basic fundamentals track as well as a more intermediate and advanced track with a lot of case studies. We believe we probably lose more Lyme doctors in the state of Pennsylvania than we acquire each year. So this is Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network's really desire and effort to try to get more Lyme education with medical practitioners so that we have more medical practitioners that we can direct Lyme patients to here in the state of Pennsylvania. So in terms of housekeeping, if you have a question and you're on Zoom, go ahead and put it in the Q&A section there at the bottom. On Facebook, go ahead and ask your question in the comments. Bill Moore will be monitoring all of the questions and all of the comments that come in while our presenters are speaking. We will hold those questions to the end and then prioritize them, and then Bill will present them to our presenters for them to answer there at the end. So tonight's speakers, we have with us Jennifer Fagen and Dr. Jeremy Shelton and Dr. Jennifer Fagen. What is really interesting about this presentation is they are the authors of a research paper that is based on a comprehensive study of nearly 1,000 individuals across 28 countries. They took this survey, they took this research report, and they took this study, and they ended up getting it published in an international peer-reviewed medical journal, PubMed. And that's through the National Institute of Health and the National Library of Medicine. And so that particular paper has attracted more attention than we've seen in a long time. We will be making available on our website not only the presentation tonight, but also access to the research reports, and you'll be able to get that once we have it posted at palyme.org. So who will be starting us off this evening will be Dr. Jennifer Fagen. She is an associate professor of sociology at Lamar University. She has a BA from Hofstra University, a master's degree from Manhattanville College, a master's degree from Harvard University Division of Continuing Education, and a PhD from Northeastern University. She has taught courses at Northeastern University and at Bentley University. She will open, and then there will be a segue over to Dr. Jeremy Shelton. He is an associate professor of psychology and the department chair at Lamar University. He has a BA in psychology from Wake Forest University and a PhD in social psychology from the University of Georgia. He has also taught courses at Athens Technical College and at the University of Georgia. So with that, allow me to stop a share screen. And then Jeremy, I will turn it over to you so that Jennifer, you can tee us up for the evening.
All right. Thank you, Eric, for having us, and thank you, Bill, as well as the audience members joining us. And I will skip over this part. I was going to tell you how to locate the article, but Eric was kind enough to offer that to everyone after this presentation. And, you know, as far as the background, I won't get into that too much because Lyme patients and chronic Lyme patients know far too well the background of Lyme disease, the testing, the misdiagnoses, how bad the testing is, how unreliable the testing is, and all of that stuff. So I won't get into that too much. What I do want to cover is the symptoms, just very briefly, because again, this audience knows the symptoms, as do our hosts. But what I wanted to focus on here is the fact that although both acute Lyme disease and chronic Lyme disease are considered contested illnesses, which I'll get into in a minute, and people with contested illnesses are more likely to experience medical gaslighting, there is more of an issue of getting medical doctors to recognize chronic Lyme disease. And the reasons I wanted to show you these slides is because there are clear differences in symptomatology between chronic Lyme disease and acute Lyme disease. So we already went through our acute Lyme disease slide, but the chronic Lyme disease, these are things that really should let doctors know that there is an ongoing infection. This isn't a new infection. And one of the unfortunate things is that, first of all, chronic Lyme disease patients suffer a worse quality of life than people with multiple sclerosis as well as arthritis, according to the peer-reviewed research. And another problem with the issue of chronic Lyme disease are those practitioners and the researchers who refer to it as PTLDS, post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. Now, there are some countries where it's more prevalent to use this terminology, but typically that terminology means that that researcher and that doctor doesn't believe that there is an ongoing infection. So you always want to watch out for that terminology, PTLDS. It's really, that term in and of itself is gaslighting chronic Lyme disease patients. And we have proof of the existence of chronic Lyme disease in animals as well as in humans. So it doesn't make sense, it's still controversial. It doesn't make sense that so many doctors don't believe their patients, that so many researchers still refer to chronic Lyme disease or CLD as PTLDS. And proof of the existence of chronic Lyme in in humans, we have proof of it in animals to start with. We have proof of it in mice, in dogs, in non-human primates, and we also have proof of it in humans. There's positive culture and PCR results that were found in many different sort of specimens in humans, and in iris biopsies, in DNA and confocal microscopy in human spinal fluid, in autopsy tissues. And you'll probably recognize some of this information, and you could easily find it in research by, for instance, Dr. Lugner, who many of you know and love. And proof of existence of chronic Lyme disease in person continues with the culture of blood, genital secretions, and skin lesions of 12 patients, despite 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotic treatment. Now, mind you, the 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotic treatment on the high end is what the IDSA thinks should be the limit, with some exceptions. And so this is the reason so many patients become chronic Lyme patients because they're not treated sufficiently in that very important acute phase. It's also been found in the urine of 72 patients who were treated with antibiotics between 3 weeks and 2 months, so well beyond what the IDSA recommends. And also after 1 to 4 months in some cases for many years, they're still finding an active infection in patients. And this is clearly delineated in the medical literature. And that can be found in our publication that Eric will be posting for everyone. All right. So medical gaslighting not only happens with chronic Lyme disease, but with acute Lyme disease as well. And what happens in that office that many of you have surely felt is the doctor, in some cases, taking advantage of the power imbalance between you and him or her, and feeling that you are not able to accurately relay your symptoms. They may be in your head, they may be something that you are exaggerating, but you, as the person who's experiencing them, because you don't have the same power as the doctor, are viewed as incapable of relaying this information. And medical gaslighting can also happen if not purposefully. And I wanted to go on to contested illnesses and medical gaslighting. People with contested illnesses are most likely to experience medical gaslighting. And if you think of long COVID, for instance, in some cases, that is still a contested illness. Contested illnesses lack objective biological markers, right? And that's why you had them like Gulf War syndrome, for instance. There's no proof of it. And the difference is, though, with Lyme disease and chronic Lyme disease, there is proof, like I just discussed. So there's no reason that it should still be defined as contested. There is proof in blood work, as Jeremy will be discussing soon. There's proof via MRIs. There's proof in some cases via spinal taps, although they're not always very accurate. And because of this, even when there is blood work, positive blood work that indicates that you have Lyme disease or an ongoing Lyme infection for a number of weeks, months, or years, you still have to fight to get a diagnosis. You still have to fight to get treatment. And what happens is this leads to what's referred to as lengthy diagnostic journeys. You go from doctor to doctor to doctor. You have to fire doctor, many doctors. You have to go to numerous specialists, in some cases dozens, in some cases over years or decades. And by that point, you have chronic Lyme disease and it can't be cured. It can be put into remission, but it's much harder and much more expensive at that point. Excuse me. What I wanted to discuss next is, and some examples of medical gaslighting, by the way, is a doctor telling you it's all in your head, or you're being a little emotional, or maybe you're working too hard. This happens more often with women. Maybe you're just, gained too much weight. Maybe you're just getting older. You're deconditioned. You need to exercise more. You need to eat less. You need to eat healthier. Those are some examples of medical gaslighting that Jeremy will be going over. Now, Dr. Kindler is another person who many of you know and respect. And he asks in his article that is in this slide, chronic Lyme disease, why is it still controversial? While it's clear that a cohort of patients treated for acute Lyme disease continue to have persistent symptoms, the etiology of these symptoms remains controversial despite clear evidence that multiple mechanisms may be responsible. These include persistent infection with Borrelia. So we know, and for those of you who have read Dr. Leekner's research and have seen his advocacy work over the years, along with other Lyme specialists, you know that this has become a political disease. It's sort of been taken out of the medical arena and it's become politicized. Why is this? Well, there we go. These 4 letters, they're very important when it comes to the politicization, of Lyme disease. Medical gaslighting does not occur in a vacuum. According to the Infectious Disease Society of America, if patients are treated with appropriate antibiotics for up to 14 days, that's it, 14 days, there is no evidence that infection persists in an otherwise immunocompetent host, meaning that if you are otherwise healthy and you still have symptoms, it's not chronic Lyme disease. It's not Lyme disease. There's no evidence as far as they're concerned, and we know this isn't the case. And they state, quote, there is no convincing biologic evidence for the existence of symptomatic chronic Lyme disease infection among patients after receipt of recommended treatment for Lyme disease. So what we're saying is this medical gaslighting, it doesn't occur in a vacuum. The IDSA is, well, if you are a medical doctor, it's not surprising that you are going to gaslight a Lyme disease patient, especially a chronic Lyme disease patient, and think that their symptoms are in their head or attributable to some other cause. This article has been pretty important. This 2012 article by Ferguson. It's called Cure Unwanted, as you can see from the slide. And what this author said is the IDSA's 2006 patient guidelines for the assessment, treatment, and prevention of Lyme disease discredited the existence of chronic Lyme disease. Well, how is this possible if all of the research that I'm referring to and that's cited in our publication and who Horowitz has cited and who Dr. Kindler has cited and Dr. Ligner has cited, how is it possible that they're saying there's no evidence when there is so much evidence from so many reputable sources in medical peer-reviewed journals? Well, according to Ferguson, it was later uncovered that the IDSA's guideline process was tainted as the IDSA did not organize any screening for conflicts of interest for its panel members. Some panel members had associations to drug companies and Lyme diagnostic tests and patents, as well as consulting arrangements with insurance companies. Now, this might sound familiar to some of you. It's quite familiar to me as someone who now has been living in Texas for about 20 years. There was a class action lawsuit in Texas, which you can look up if you don't know about it, which brought by Lyme disease patients that infers that there was some inappropriate behavior going on with some of these medical entities and insurance companies to deny the existence of chronic Lyme disease for financial benefit. Now, back to Ferguson, some panel members obtained fees for acting as expert witnesses in medical malpractice suits related to Lyme disease. These panel members all stood to benefit financially if their restricted definition of Lyme disease remained the same. So in other words, if the IDSA guidelines didn't change to recognize chronic Lyme disease, the IDSA panel chairperson, who held a bias against the existence of chronic Lyme disease, purportedly excluded those who believed in the existence of chronic Lyme disease from this panel of experts, and also would not allow Lyme patients on the panel. In 2008, the IDSA agreed to review its guidelines. They conducted a review of their own guidelines, and shockingly, the review board of the IDSA determined once again that there was no compelling evidence of chronic Lyme infection. As a result, many Lyme patients today continue to find themselves in the situation that many of you find yourselves in, going from doctor to doctor to doctor for years, for decades, and not having your treatments covered by insurance, not having your Lyme disease specialists covered by insurance, which is the not being able to collect benefits because chronic Lyme disease is not recognized. You can't get disability benefits typically for having chronic Lyme disease, as opposed to many other conditions that are just as severe or even less severe than chronic Lyme disease. And I just do want to make a note of the fact that there are some Lyme specialists who do believe in chronic Lyme disease, who do also hold membership in the IDSA, the Infectious Disease Society of America. So this isn't the case for all of the doctors, but it is an overwhelming problem. And as I mentioned previously, here are some examples of medical gaslighting. And at this point, Jeremy will discuss the statistics.
Okay, thanks very much, Jen. As was said earlier, we published an international survey that's garnered about just under 1,000 respondents. As you can see on the screen there, 986 respondents to be precise. Now, these respondents came from 28 different countries. Now, having said that, the majority of our sample, and in fact, 95% of it, were people that resided in one of 5 nations. So later, when I talk about how Lyme experiences differ, if they do, between various nations, it's going to be these 5 that I'm going to be focusing on. Approximately half our sample came from the United States, 15% from Australia, another 15% from Canada, 9% from Ireland, and 8% from the United Kingdom. To give you an idea of the types of people that we were getting responses from, 85% of them were female and 15% male. 92% were Caucasians, and only 1% identified as Black, Native American, or Asian. 1% of the sample did not answer the question about their race, and then 6% reported other or mixed race. Now, how do these people know that they, in fact, have Lyme disease? We asked them about this, and just over 70% said that their diagnosis came from receiving a positive blood test result. Although, as we'll see shortly, that didn't get them as much traction in the medical community as they were hoping for. 13% said their diagnosis was with the aid of a physician and was driven by symptomology as opposed to an official blood test. Another 4%, they self-diagnosed after various test results. And then another 2% said that their diagnosis was self-based and symptom-driven. And then 9% gave us various other responses to that question. So as you can see here, the point of sharing this with you is that the vast majority of our respondents, in fact, 85%, were shown to conclusively have Lyme disease, either through a blood test or with the aid of a specialist, a physician, showing that their symptoms were consistent with Lyme. Now, when I talk about the results, most people are used to hearing about the average result or the mean. I'm going to share those with you, but I think the better way to understand the average person's experience from our survey results is using the median, or literally the value that cuts the whole distribution in half. Half of the people above it, half are below it. And that's because all of our results were positively skewed for those who like statistics. If you don't, that's okay. The point being, I would trust the median in our results a little more than the mean to describe the average person's experience. Here were the types of key questions that we asked, and you'll probably be most interested in seeing the results for. I'll get more into the gaslighting results momentarily. But we asked our respondents how many years since the infection did it take for you to receive some kind of official diagnosis. And as you can see, on average, that was 11 and a half years, a median of 7 years. So definitely not as fast as people would like. Also, how many doctors did you see until you did receive an official diagnosis? The median there was 10 doctors, which, that's just absolutely ridiculous. In a first world medical healthcare situation, to have to go to 10 different doctors before someone will diagnose you with the condition that you have. Our respondents had 14 years, generally speaking, of suffering from Lyme. Again, half had more years than that with the disease, half had fewer. As far as the gaslighting experiences, it did vary. Gaslighting is not unidimensional. In other words, it's not always done the same way, as Jen discussed earlier. And we were interested to see with our sample, well, what were the common experiences with gaslighting? How did it manifest in a visit at a doctor's office? And how did it not tend to manifest? Because as I said, it's not always done the same way. Well, we found that generally speaking, gaslighting follows a basic pattern. And that is, first of all, the veracity or legitimacy of the patient's experiences are questioned by the medical professional. Now, how might that play out? Well, in a variety of ways. We had many of our respondents saying that between 6 or more doctors, again, the average here is just over 9, we're just told them you are overreacting to your symptoms, which is very, very distressing when I saw that result. It's basically just telling a person, no, the pain is not as bad as you're experiencing. You're just wrong. And well, who better to clarify how much pain they're experiencing than the person experiencing it? So I just can't imagine the frustration that patients must have felt when they were told you're just overreacting to otherwise mild symptoms. Another very common gaslighting type of experience, again, that undermines the legitimacy of what the patient says is going on with their own body, is they're just told it can't be chronic Lyme because there's just no such thing as that. It does not exist. Or their symptoms were implied by the medical professional to be psychosomatic. That term just means that it is in your head. That, in other words, when someone experiences a psychosomatic symptom, that means there is no physiological base whatsoever for the symptom or cause of it, and thus you must be imagining it, and that's what's causing the symptom. And as Jen said before, there is plenty of biological evidence that shows that chronic Lyme disease exists. So, that just makes these types of gaslighting experiences that much more problematic when they're coming from a professional who should know better. So if it's not chronic Lyme, then what is it? Because most patients will want, some kind of explanation besides it's in your head. And when they pushed their medical professional to do better than that, they were told it's just normal aging. And if that was the case, as the population of this whole country aged, if they actually experienced these symptoms, I promise you, there would be much more publicity for this problem than there is. It is not part of normal aging. Or they're told it's just due to stress, because these days, who doesn't experience stress? But again, we all experience stress. That doesn't mean we're all experiencing these symptoms that our respondents were. But notice how the idea here, the common pattern, is that to make the person doubt that what they're experiencing is in fact even real. And it definitely casts doubt on the idea that it could be due to chronic Lyme. In some cases, even the patient's sanity was questioned. In other words, they were literally told by their medical professional that your symptoms are actually the result of having some kind of mental illness. We did not ask our respondents specifically what kind of mental illness the healthcare professional might have told them they were suffering from, but I can only imagine the stress that that created for the patients when they think they're getting a handle on it and then told, no, actually, you probably have some kind of mental disorder or illness. So what does medical gaslighting look like within the US beyond just what doctors were ascribing the symptoms to beyond chronic or besides chronic Lyme disease? Well, we asked our respondents, did your medical professional refuse to provide you a blood test even after you directly requested it? And we found that our results did vary. The CDC designates approximately 14 states, if I'm not mistaken, as Lyme endemic. That's what LE stands for on the slide here. Lyme endemic states, or states in which Lyme disease is rather prevalent. And then, of course, the other states of the US are designated as non-Lyme endemic or non-LE states. We found that where our respondents in the US resided did influence the answer they gave us to the question about their doctor refusing a blood test. And you can see there on the slide that just over half of respondents in the Lyme endemic states said, yeah, my doctor said they wouldn't grant my request for a blood test. Whereas that result was higher, 65%, in non-Lyme endemic states, which if you think about it, that does make sense. Maybe doctors in Lyme endemic states are not as aware of Lyme, or at least don't think it's a real possibility, so they're going to be more likely to say no. Regardless, even in states where Lyme is common, over half of our respondents had doctors refuse their direct requests for a blood test. So it's very disconcerting. Let's say you do get a blood test, though, and it shows up positive. That should clear things up, right? Well, not so much. We found that across both types of states, even though it did vary, it was somewhat less likely in Lyme endemic states for the doctor to remain unconvinced that the patient had chronic Lyme after the positive blood test. But again, these numbers are very sobering and distressing. Over 70% of our respondents that resided in Lyme endemic states said that, yeah, my doctor, even after I got the blood test and it came back positive, did not believe the result of the blood test. And that number went up to 82% in non-Lyme endemic states. What about how long someone has had Lyme until they received an official diagnosis? That also varied by the state they lived in. As you would expect, it didn't take as long in Lyme endemic states. But again, the numbers here are just terrible. Over 10 years and over 14 years if you live in a state where Lyme is not common. Some people were told, well, you can't possibly have Lyme because there are not ticks in this area. That also is unlikely to be true. The range of ticks is quite vast in the country, even in non-Lyme endemic states. It's not like ticks stop at the border of a state. And you see here, as you would expect, in Lyme endemic states, respondents didn't have many doctors tell them you can't have Lyme because there's no ticks, whereas that number jumps up quite a bit when you're in a non-Lyme endemic state. Also, despite having the bullseye rash, one of the most common symptoms that's indisputably associated with Lyme disease, you have doctors telling the patient, no, that's not because of Lyme, it must be something else. So, that's one of the most distressing and also just blatant gaslighting that we found our patients experience. And then, although it wasn't based on traditional statistical thresholds significant. It almost reached that point. That's why I included it here on the slide. But not only were patients implied by their doctors that your symptoms are psychosomatic, we had more patients or respondents in non-Lyme endemic states tell us that their doctors explicitly told them, this is just in your head. It's not attributable to a real biological condition. Now, how do these experiences vary based on the nation a person lived in? Now, as I said before, the vast majority of our sample, 95%, came from the 5 nations I mentioned earlier. So we could only really compare experiences across those nations. You can't take a nation that maybe 3 people resided in and make a meaningful comparison for them. That's just not possible. So that's why we only have these 5 nations here. But it's still instructive, the results that we obtained. So we asked again, did the doctor refuse your direct request for a blood test? And we found that the country a person resided in did make a difference there. As you can see, the culprit here is Australia, that over 80% of our respondents who resided in Australia answered yes to the question of being refused a blood test. Those numbers lower in the other 4 countries, but you'll see they're still quite high. They hover around the mid-50s to 60%. So there's definitely room for improvement here. What about the doctor still being convinced after the positive blood test? Again, that also varied depending on where you lived. Australia, again, 94% of the respondents said that they had experienced this form of gaslighting with their medical health professional. The number doesn't go down all that much depending on the other nations. So it's still distressingly high, in the high 70s and in some cases high 80%. So that's a lot of people just being told you don't have Lyme despite biological evidence suggesting otherwise. This last one, treated as a marginalized group, again, it wasn't statistically different based on where people lived. So you may wonder, well, why is he including it here? The reason I'm including it is because the numbers are just so high no matter where you lived. And that's just unacceptable. Nobody should feel as though their medical health professional doesn't think they're important. That's just in direct violation of the Hippocratic Oath. But as you can see from the results here, many of our respondents across all 5 of these nations said that that's how they were treated, as though they were part of a marginalized group. And again, more Australian doctors than any other location told patients explicitly you did not have Lyme disease despite them having that bullseye rash. So the results don't look good in any of these 5 nations, to be quite blunt, but definitely people in Australia seem to have it somewhat worse than in the other 4 nations that we obtained responses from. I'm going to now turn it back over to Jen, and she's going to talk about the most noteworthy responses and provide a conclusion to our presentation.
Yeah, I know for all the people listening that it's really hard to imagine that there would be somewhere, another country that's worse for Lyme patients and chronic Lyme disease patients than the United States. But it was absolutely shocking to see what's happening in the other countries. They've basically been entirely orphaned by the healthcare system with a few Lyme specialists in each region. Much more difficult than even for us to obtain medical care. So overall, what we want you to know and what we want you to leave with is the fact that in the US sample, a positive blood test didn't influence whether a doctor believed a patient had Lyme disease or not. Bringing it right out of the category of a contested illness. It should never be contested. No one should ever look at a positive blood test and doubt the veracity of what the patient has. Chronic Lyme disease is in the medical literature. And part of the reason, in fact, a major impetus for us writing and publishing this research and publishing it in an open access journal, where everyone, including Lyme disease patients who tend to be low on funds because of the reasons that have already been mentioned, that you have access to it. We want you to be able to print this out or mail it, bring it to your medical doctors, so you have ammunition in a legitimate medical journal that's peer reviewed, that when they tell you there's no such thing as chronic Lyme, or, I doubt that this is true, it hasn't been proven, that you could hand it right over to them at that point. And that it's in the medical literature. It's been substantiated in humans, in dogs, in mice, in non-human primates, and that an average of almost 14 doctors, meaning half of the respondents, saw more than 14 doctors were seen prior to receiving a Lyme disease diagnosis. That's unacceptable. We've had, 40 years now, about a little under 40 years or so, for doctors to catch up on this research, for the medical entities to catch up on the research, for people to be educated, for doctors to be educated, I mean, and it's still not happening often enough, clearly. A median of 4 doctors told respondents there's no such thing as chronic Lyme disease still. These doctors have access to these medical journals. It's what they do, it's what they read. The unfortunate thing is that, as I mentioned before, it has become politicized, and blinders are put on when they see things that don't fit with the ideology. And some of these medical entities, as I mentioned before, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of power, they have a lot of cultural hegemony. They're also tend to be more likely to be peer reviewers of, when it comes to these medical journals, editors in the medical journals. So it's much harder to get publications if these publications mention chronic Lyme disease. So all of these factors come together to make it very difficult for Lyme patients and chronic Lyme disease patients. 85% of respondents reported, as Jeremy just mentioned, as being treated as a marginalized patient group. It's an obscene amount of people. And the last line of the article, attributable to Jeremy, mounting evidence of persistent infection underscores that patients with Lyme disease are deserving of serious consideration by medical practitioners. The Hippocratic Oath demands nothing less. That Hippocratic Oath means something. That's why it's called an oath. Doctors are supposed to abide by it, but there seems to be issues with them doing so. And I guess at this point, it will be turned over to questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If anybody has questions, if you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature on Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, you can leave a comment. We do have a question on Facebook. I'll let anybody who wants to answer this try to answer it. Are there suggested strategies for us to get these medical professionals to become more educated on tick-borne illnesses? How can we get them to attend medical conferences, for example? Yeah, I know.
If only we had that much power, but it is, we're professors, right? And so all we can do is try to get these publications through. It's hard work, but the thing is, more and more publications about medical gaslighting, more and more publications at a much more rapid pace than have been in the past, are coming out about not only chronic Lyme disease and proof of it, although there's been proof for a long, long time, but medical gaslighting and Lyme disease. There are a lot more articles followed ours. And what we would recommend is you come with those articles. You go to your doctor's office with those articles in your hand. And what I would also recommend is that if a doctor refuses to give you a blood test, anything the doctor refuses to do, ask that doctor or nurse or other medical practitioner to document that refusal and put it in your file at that office, and the file that they keep online. You ask them to do it. That decreases the chance that they will follow through and refuse it. But if they do, they know it's going to go on record that it was their refusal, not your lack of persistence. The other thing I would say is, if you can't bring someone to your doctor's appointment with you, record the doctor's appointment in some form or fashion. Now, depending on what's legal in your state. I'm in Texas, the Wild West, down south. I have to be honest that I've actually gone to doctor's offices with a tiny recorder shoved somewhere where the doctor can't see it. And that is legal in Texas. I wouldn't say go ahead and do that if it's not legal in your state. We have a one-party consent state, which means that as long as one party consents, me, I can record it surreptitiously and without the other person's permission. And I would recommend that if it's legal in your state. If not, take notes. And here's what I think is very important as well. And Lyme disease patients and chronic Lyme disease patients probably don't need to hear this, because you are so smart and so savvy and so well versed in Lyme disease and chronic Lyme disease, because you probably had to be in order to get your diagnosis. But what I would recommend is that you make sure you look for those doctor's notes as soon as possible. If they don't send it immediately, make sure to tell them to send it to you immediately. I want you to review every word of those doctor's notes and of the patient notes, of the nurse's notes or the assistant's notes beforehand, before the appointment. And I want you to go through that. And if there is something in there that does not accurately reflect what you said in that appointment, or accurately reflect your condition, your medications, and so on, I want you in writing to send a message to that doctor's office and let them know that these are incorrect, that they prevent you from getting proper continuity of care, and ask them in writing to change those notes to accurately reflect what you said, the medications you took, or what your condition is. For instance, if you've already been diagnosed with Lyme disease from a medical practitioner and they say you don't have it, make sure that diagnosis is in there. If they refuse, make sure you let them know that you will be contacting the AMA, the American Medical Association, to let them know. We have to hold them accountable. We have to balance out this asymmetrical power relationship between doctor and patient.
I'll just add to that briefly. My area is in social psychology, so one of the topics that we study is how to get people to do things they don't want to do. And I'll just say very briefly, there's a whole field of research on social interaction that specializes in this. And the one book that's out there that you might actually want to check out is called Influence. It's written by Robert Cialdini. That's spelled Cialdini. It's a classic in the field of psychology. It's been around for 40 some years now. He is the world-renowned expert on influencing people's actions through speaking with them. and it will give you, I believe it's 7 or 8 very specific strategies that you can use in any interpersonal interaction, but particularly in a doctor's office, to get someone to see things your way and be more likely to honor a request that you make, even if initially they're not inclined to do so. I do recommend checking that book out and employing those strategies. They are proven to work.
Good information. Thank you. We have a question on Zoom. Can the obvious conflicts of interest per panelist be taken to the state medical board as a complaint, maybe on a class basis? I think this is referring to the
Yeah.
conflict of interest that existed with the IDSA.
Yeah, this has already been done. There's already been political action taken. The governor of Connecticut, I think, is pretty well known for doing this, and this goes back to how moneyed the IDSA is and how much power and hegemony they have, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. That proves to be a difficult process, but there have been people fighting this for a very, very long time. Jenna Luce Thayer, who could not be with us tonight, who is also a co-author on the article. She has been one of the people who have been extremely influential in this political process. She is a former senior advisor to the UN. She worked for the World Health Organization. She's the reason, well, we just pulled out of the World Health Organization. Was that the WHO? Yep, we just pulled out of that yesterday, our new administration. So yeah, so much for that at this point, but we'll leave that to the ACLU. But she has been a really important person to influence major institutions to show these biases, to show how Lyme patients are not treated with basic human rights. And she's one of the reasons, one of the very important reasons, that there are new Lyme disease codes that recognize persistent Lyme disease. I don't know how this will play out now that now that the new administration has pulled out of the WHO, the World Health Organization, where these new codes have been implemented. But so much has been done that it's just difficult when the financial resources and power structure are so disparate. It's a good question.
Here's a question from Facebook. Is there work being done to get this information into medical schools, or what's the possibility of getting that?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but you know, what gets in the journal is largely controlled by those who have money and those who have the power. The content that's taught in medical schools, you'll find a similar issue. And if you ask your Lyme disease specialists how much time they spent studying Lyme disease in medical school, you'll hear anything you'll hear anything from a few hours to a day to maybe 2 weeks. It's just not something that's really studied, and we don't know how to get it in there. You're talking about major institutions that have a whole lot of power coming together. And Dr. Ligner's famous quote, how does it go? I can't think of it off the bat, but he has a very famous quote about how the institutions in the United States have come together to deny the existence of a disease. How an embarrassing and tragic moment, I'm paraphrasing, in US history it has been that this has happened. And one of those institutions are academic institutions.
All right, here's another question. Any suggestions for family members caring for those patients experiencing gaslighting by the medical community? How can we support them emotionally?
Huh. Actually, and Jeremy, as a psychologist, surely or may have ideas about this as well. But the first part is not to contribute to the gaslighting that happens far too often with the family members, and surely not the family members attending here. We know from our hosts that a lot of family members are going to be watching the recording or here right now who want to support. I think one of the important things you can do is Fred Diamond, who you may know, and he does a lot of podcasts of Horowitz and all the big guys, and fit us in there too. He has a book that we don't benefit at all from mentioning, but Fred Diamond's book, I can't think of the title at the moment, but it is solely for those family members to help support Lyme disease patients. It's Love, Hope, and Lyme.
Right.
So I would I think that would be probably a good thing to do, is pick up his book, and he was in the position of supporting someone as well, and he's I would look at that. I'm sorry, Jeremy, did you want to say something while I'm thinking?
Well, I think something you said earlier is, unfortunately, this is a situation where you really need to be your own advocate. It shouldn't be that way. You're going to a professional and putting yourself in their care, and you would hope they would empathize with you and look out for your best interest. But as we've just seen, that's not always the case. So in those circumstances, you have to just be a tireless advocate. And some patients, I imagine, are very good at doing this for themselves. They're not going to roll over. They're not going to just take it lying down. Others, that's just not the way they are. So if you have someone in your family who's struggling with Lyme and is not one of these outspoken types of people and isn't comfortable maybe with conflict or things of that nature, and you are, that is one of the absolute best ways you can support them, is be there for them, be their advocate, and fight those battles that they're not comfortable fighting for their own benefit. Uh, Beyond that, I would say the other thing you can do is just let them know that they're not alone. I do think it would be helpful if, and many people watching this probably have already done this, but in case they haven't, is if family members can get their loved ones who are struggling with Lyme to reach out and make connections with other people who are going through the same thing. It's always very, very helpful to the basic psychological health of someone struggling with whatever the case may be, to have others who are going through the same thing that they can speak with and share their concerns and fears with, and maybe even get resources from to help them collectively deal with that problem.
Which is why it's so great what our hosts here are doing. And they're, trying to help people get those connections, especially younger people, and know that when someone has Lyme disease, and the family members watching right now will understand this, they're not going to have the same personality that they did before they had Lyme disease. They're going to be depressed. They're going to be angry. They're not going to be themselves. They're not going to have as much patience. And I think it's important for family members to understand, which surely the ones who are listening right now already do, that's not them. That's the Lyme disease speaking. So to be as patient as possible and not take it personally. Sorry, I just stopped saying that abruptly without letting you know I was done.
Bill, if I can jump in with the question, I got a couple of questions texted to me. Is there any follow-up research paper that you both are envisioning?
Jeremy, should I take this?
Sure, go for it.
I sigh because how long did we spend working on this, Jeremy? For a year and a half? Does
Yes,
that
that's
sound
right.
about right? A
Yeah.
year and a half, and not a year and a half once a week, a year and a half every single day for hours and hours and hours every single day. And then, you know, getting it published again, we encountered that same resistance of, no, this isn't real. And it was emotionally just, it was just, I can't even explain it. So I think what we're doing right now, other than, you know, the teaching and and working on some other projects, is once we sort of take a breather, one of the things that we really would like to do, and we've run it by some Lyme doctors already, is to use a survey as sort of a few things, you know, change there, and survey Lyme doctors who experienced, and as you know, some Lyme doctors, Lyme specialists have Lyme disease, right? Which is why they got into it, is look at the gaslighting that they have experienced as people with Lyme disease, despite the fact that they are medical practitioners themselves, and possibly also include the Lyme doctors who don't have Lyme disease, and the medical gaslighting they've experienced from other medical practitioners or the IDSA or the, you know, hospitals or whatever, telling these doctors that what they know to be true through the research that chronic Lyme exists doesn't really exist. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we've been thinking about lately.
You have any more questions, Eric?
No, the effort that it took, obviously, for the both of you to put the time and the energy into this,
And
um,
Jenna.
and Jenna as well, but the reaction that you got from the Lyme community is really overwhelming. And if I could go back maybe one question or several questions, one of the questions was, you know, what can we do to help educate our doctors? And the answers that were given are accurate. You know, this is not taught in medical school, so and probably most everyone is probably familiar with the general parameters of how the guidelines of Lyme came into being. But the IDSA, the Infectious Disease Society of America, they published their first guidelines in 2006. And those guidelines came out and basically said Lyme disease is difficult to get, it's easy to cure, 2 to 3 weeks of doxycycline, and then you're fine. Yes, you might have symptoms, but it's not from the bacteria. Later, they called it a post-treatment syndrome, not really from the bacteria itself. They were sued by the at that time attorney general from Connecticut, as Jennifer said, Blumenthal, and he won. When he sued the IDS, he went after them and some of the individuals. It's my understanding that there were 14 doctors, I believe they were all doctors, that were on the committee for the guidelines of the IDSA Lyme guidelines. And it's my understanding from looking at some of the documentaries, reading some of the books and testimonials, that of the 14 individuals, 9 of them had conflicts of interest. So there was a conflict of interest of, you know, having royalties, having patents, getting speaker fees from insurance companies for Lyme denial. And so there was just a general sense of the suit that the Attorney General Blumenthal brought. He was successful in getting them to take a look at those guidelines. We were very much relishing that when they came out 5 years later in 2011 to update those guidelines, we thought there was going to be some real changes to what the guidelines are. And remember, this is the IDSA. They're saying these are infectious disease doctors. What is Lyme? What is the disease? What are the symptoms? How do you treat it? How do you test for it? Just kind of the basic nuts and bolts. Well, they came back out in 2011 and did not make much, if any, changes whatsoever. In that interim, and slightly before that, is where ILADS, the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, was formed. And that was a group of medical professionals that recognized Lyme is real. It is easy to get, it's difficult to treat. The methodology that was being recommended by the IDSA and the CDC was insufficient. And so ILADS came out, and you would find them, ilads.org, on the internet. On their website is about an 11-page document that they have written for medical practitioners. So you can download that, you can print that, and it is to educate doctors as to what Lyme is, what does it look like, what's the science, what's the research behind it, how do you treat it, how do you recognize it. So that 11-page document is pretty instrumental, that if you're working with a medical doctor that is denying Lyme, that you feel you are getting gaslit medically, you can share that with that doctor. And remember, that is the conference that we are hosting in June in Philadelphia at the Drexel University College of Medicine. The purpose of that conference is for us, the grassroots, those of you that are on this webinar, those of you that have family members. We want to be producing information that you can share with your doctors to invite them to attend. So we are looking at finding ways of having early bird discounts and costs, having new member discounts for individuals that maybe are not members of ILAD. So if the powers to be, the IDSA, the teaching colleges, academia, those that really control the financial, the grants, the research, if they are not going to be promoting that there is another set of guidelines, we have to take it on as a grassroots community, and we really need your effort to invite your doctor to attend, and it works. When we look at our internal list of doctors in Pennsylvania that are ILADS trained, that are in good standing, that are Lyme specialists, that recognize chronic Lyme, a lot of them 10 years ago were not doing this, but they came to an ILADS medical conference. We've hosted a total of 6 of them now in about the last 12, 13 years. So we're appealing to you to get your doctors to attend.
It's amazing
I
what
don't
you're
know if
doing.
that offers anything, Jennifer or Jeremy, any other things you might want to add to that, or any other, comments maybe in closing. Bill, I don't know if you got any other questions.
There was a question asking about, you mentioned a package of info to take to my doctor. What would it take to put this package together and email it out to advocates and patients? I think he's suggesting that we have some resource that we could share with people.
Yeah, the shit and that stuff that Eric mentioned from ILADS and our publication, which has all the proof there, a lot of the proof. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think also, and that's great, what you're doing for the community, Eric and Bill, and those conferences with ILADS. I think that mistakenly a lot of families, and you're in communication, I think, with the families that are here tonight, or they're in your network somewhat. So they might already be familiar with this, but the tendency is to go straight to an infectious disease doctor. The infectious disease doctors, by and large, will tell you that there's no such thing as chronic Lyme, and that's where you're going to experience the most a lot of the medical gaslighting. That iLads is an important website. It also has a list of practitioners that have been well trained and that believe that chronic Lyme exists. They know that chronic Lyme exists, and they don't believe that that short duration of treatment is really effective. And they don't believe in the PTLD and the PTLDS and all of that. They believe in chronic Lyme disease. So that iLad site, you can find the list of practitioners as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Nothing else necessarily to add to that. Well, the question of can we get that information out? That particular reference piece is on the iLads website, ilads.org. And it's a practical, I think it's called something like Practical Guide for Physicians.
Yeah.
So that's a great starting point. There's other information on iLads website, Project Lyme website, Global Lyme Alliance website, palyme.org website. So there is a host of credible information that is available on multiple different websites. And I think I'll, reflect back to what Jeremy said. You have to be your own best health advocate. Nobody's going to do this for you. If they're not teaching it in medical school, if your doctor's not aware of it, if you're getting referred by your GP to a IDSA infectious disease doctor, you're going to be bounced around within a silo. Well, it looks like rheumatoid arthritis, so talk to a rheumatoid arthritis doctor. It looks like it could be an MS, so talk to an MS specialist. Could be chronic fatigue, could be fibromyalgia. So with Jeremy and Jennifer, there's studies showing that the average number of doctors that these respondents to the survey saw before getting a proper diagnosis was 14 doctor visits, 14 different doctors. And that's not over a period of 3 months. That's probably over a period of years and years. So if the community, the medical community as a whole, is not recognizing this emerging disease for what it is, based on science and evidence and research, then you have to be your own best advocate and start spoon feeding a lot of this information. It's criminal that it has to be like this, but that's the way it is. No sense bitching and moaning and complaining. That's not going to do us any good. We have to become advocates and be proactive, and let's start getting doctors to our conferences so we can start training them up.
One other thing that I'll say, and I found this works well with students that I teach who I know are capable, but they're just not applying themselves. They're not taking a course seriously, things of that nature. And I'll sit them down and I'll tell them, look, imagine if you had one of your children at college and they were being told no for something that they needed, maybe an accommodation, for a disability or something of that nature. How would you react to that? And every single student I talk to says, oh, well, I wouldn't stand for that. I would move heaven and earth to get them whatever it is they needed. And I'll look at them and say, well, why not take that attitude with yourself and your own education? What I think might help in some cases is to, talk to your doctor and say, look, imagine that instead of me you're talking to, it was your own child with these symptoms. And, wouldn't you explore every possible avenue to try and help someone that you loved and cared for? So why aren't you doing that with me? I'm not guaranteeing this will work, but it might help create a little more empathy and change their perspective on it. And then they might be more willing to at least take some of the literature you provide them more seriously and pay it some more attention. So just a thought.
Well said. Mr. Moore, anything else?
I think we're out of questions.
Okay. Jennifer and Jeremy, want to thank you very much. I mean, the work you've done is groundbreaking. It really sets the die, it creates a template for us it arms us with more ammunition. It's very, very meaningful. So for the hours that you spend daily for 18 months, it was well worth it. Maybe in the moment it didn't feel like that, but we are reaping that benefit. So as a community, we thank you. So with that, let's go ahead and just call it an evening, and we'll do this again. We'll talk to you both down the road, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Appreciate the
much.
opportunity to
All right.
speak.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.